This week on the Communicators, our guest is Representative Zoe Lofgren of California on legislation and issues that affect the high-tech industry.
Zoe Lofgren was first elected in 1995. She represents the 16th District of California. And welcome to Communicators.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Our guest host for today's program is Adrianne Kroepsch of Congressional Quarterly, covers telecommunications for that publication. And thank you for being here. Representative Lofgren, you represent the San Jose area of California. Would it be fair to say that you represent indirectly or directly Silicon Valley?
Yes, really, there's three of us, Mike Honda, Anna Eshoo, and I, who represent the bulk of Silicon Valley.
With that in mind, how does that approach legislation that happens in Congress on and off the Hill that is in particular interest to your constituents?
Well, we go home, the three of us, basically every weekend, and we just swim in technology every weekend. All our neighbors, everybody we know is into the tech world, and you end up focusing on many of the issues that are of concern to our constituents.
As you've been going through this legislative calendar and other, are there big themes, I guess, when it comes to the world of tech and telecom that you follow?
Oh, well, yes. Certainly net neutrality is a major issue. Whether we're actually going to succeed in this Congress, I don't think so, but it is an enormously important issue that I think under President Obama will finally get settled. He certainly gets it.
Well, Adrianne Kroepsch.
Well, as far as people getting it, I recently was watching on YouTube a clip of you being interviewed by Google CEO Eric Schmidt.
Oh, that was fun.
He called you the smartest lawyer he knows in Congress.
I think it's flattery we'll get.
But you're not a computer scientist or an engineer by training. You're a lawyer by training. How did you bone up on all of these really complicated tech and telecom issues as a congresswoman to effectively represent your constituents, and especially as the issues continue to evolve?
Well, it's a couple things. One, I listen. And two, I'm fortunate that I've got a lot of people at home that I can listen to who really know a lot. Some of the policy issues are, they are legal issues, but I really believe if you don't understand at some basic level, I mean, I'm not purporting to be an engineer, I'm not, but if you don't understand the technology issues at some basic level, you're going to make mistakes on the policy level. So I really, I insist that people come in and explain the technology issues in a way that a non-techie, a non-engineer can understand, so that I can hopefully make good choices that will promote freedom, that will promote the marketplace, that will promote growth and opportunity. And the other thing about me is that I like gadgets. My staff is always making fun of me. I'm always getting the latest thing and trying to make it work and fool around with it.
Well, and do you wish along those lines that more of your colleagues were also as conversant in these issues and maybe a little more into gadgets?
Well, it's all over the board. I mean, and it's not necessarily the people you would think. I mean, because we have staff that help us. Sometimes it's not possible for the public to know, is that the 23-year-old staffer, or is it the 55-year-old member of Congress? But there are certainly members of Congress who are real white out on the screen folks, and then there are people who really have a fairly sophisticated understanding, and they're not necessarily who you would think.
Google was one of those people that weighed in heavily on the net neutrality issue. What was their stance? Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. All of us in Silicon Valley, and I would add the speaker. I mean, she represents San Francisco, but she took a very strong interest in a pro-net neutrality. I mean, we can't allow the pipes to control the content. I mean, really what's being suggested would be ultimately would leave the selection of what content the internet users up to the ISP instead of the user. I mean, that's not the way the internet is. That would be cable TV-izing the internet, and it's just, we can't allow that. We can't allow that.
What did you make of the FCC decision on Comcast about their network management?
Well, I think the FCC, obviously I don't have all of the details that the FCC has, but it is of concern that they are really violating the principles of net neutrality, and they were very defensive about it. And I think the FCC has now caught them and said, you can't do that, and there has to be a sanction. And I think that that's a proper action, because these principles are really what has allowed the internet to flourish. And as we move so much more of our commerce and even our private enjoyment or our family connections online, we have to control things as internet users. We can't allow that control to be ceded to providers.
Well, and it looks like the FCC is definitely taking the lead on
Yes.
net neutrality at the moment.
Which is fine.
And that was going to be my question, is do you think it's an issue better handled by the FCC than Congress? And then within Congress, is it something that should be handled within the House Judiciary, where you sit, or Energy and Commerce? Because I know the two panels take different approaches legally, since they have different jurisdictions.
Right. As you know, I am on a bill with Chairman John Conyers that takes the approach that the Clayton Antitrust Act ought to be the vehicle for preserving net neutrality. Senator Markey, chair of the Telecom Committee, has a net neutrality bill that takes a slightly more regulatory approach. And then, of course, the FCC is doing their own thing. I actually think that the antitrust approach is preferable, or else I wouldn't have introduced it. But Markey's approach is not terrible, which is why I'm a co-sponsor of his bill as well. And really, if the FCC can make it happen without legislation, I'd also be happy with that. No pride of authorship here. I just think we have to get this done for the American people, and really it's beyond the American people. It's a freedom issue for the world.
When you say freedom issue, expand on that.
Well, if Comcast, just to use the current example, can decide, or AT&T, what I can see or what I can send, that is a tremendous infringement on my freedom to communicate. We saw that recently with a brief foray into controlling content about a very touchy issue, which is reproductive freedom. There was a quick retreat from that, but that's a little glimpse of the future we could have if we don't get on the right side of net neutrality.
You talked about the FCC and sanctions. Should there be penalty towards Comcast in particular?
Well, I'm going to leave that to the FCC. That's a regulatory issue for them to approach. But I do think that companies respond to the marketplace, and part of the marketplace is the regulatory situation. And if you can misbehave and there's no sanction, then obviously there's no deterrence. And so there needs to be at least enough to catch the attention of people who might do the wrong thing, and so that they will amend their behavior in the future.
Senator Obama is also pro-net neutrality.
Yes, he is.
You were one of the first members of the House to support Obama. You're also a superdelegate, I believe.
Yes, I am. We all are.
Okay. And he was also the first candidate to lay out a technology agenda.
Yeah.
Do you support what you've seen in that agenda, and
Yes.
what do you like about it?
Well, I like the fact that it's on his agenda. I mean, from a lot of things, from the net neutrality position he's taken, which is very, very key, to the idea that he wants to have a chief technology officer for the federal government. You want to be disappointed. Take a look at where the federal government is technologically. It's frightening, and sometimes I just think there's no one in charge of this stuff, or there's no one who knows anything who's in charge of this stuff. And so that really will be very important. I take slices of what I see based on my committee jurisdiction, but Department of Homeland Security, what a mess. You take a look at the immigration functions that are in USCIS, they're still making paper files. I mean, this is 2008. They're creating paper files. We need to really take a large advance.
When you say, when you talk about DHS, there was a couple of weeks ago statements by two representatives, Chris Smith and Frank Wolf, about their computers being compromised by China. Thought I read that you're following up on this issue as far as telling legislators, at least instructing them how to keep the integrity of their computers.
Right.
What are you going to do with that?
Here's the situation, as I have been told by our IT guys. We all know, I mean, if you visit websites that are provocative, you're opening yourself up to viruses and other kinds of malware. That is what happened in this case. I'm not suggesting that human rights advocates shouldn't do web surfing of Chinese websites. But if you do it, don't do it on a network computer, and don't do it on a laptop that has sensitive information, because you're going to lose it. And so people need to know that. And certainly there are vulnerabilities that members, some do. I was stunned to realize that members of Congress didn't realize they're taking their BlackBerry overseas and there's a vulnerability there. Then they bring it home and load it into their network computer. Is like, well, that's a problem. So a lot of this, the first line of defense is talking to the members of Congress themselves and their staffs so that they're aware of kind of the environment they're in, because we're our first line of defense, each one of us who's a computer user or on the internet. Certainly, I serve in the House Administration Committee, and it's important, in addition to the users of the system, that we have vigorous cybersecurity efforts in place. One of the first things I did when I was appointed to the committee was to ask the IT guys to come in and tell me what they were doing. And I got a report, and actually since that time they've upped it a little bit. And I actually confidentially took our efforts and ran it by some folks I know in Silicon Valley who told me they thought it was not only good, but pretty good, very good. Nothing's perfect, and nothing is ever done, because the hackers are constantly innovating, and we need to constantly, be ahead of this. So it's a race that's never over, but certainly we're in the game.
Well, and you're spearheading some efforts in Congress, I believe, to brief members.
Well, we are, and it was Frank Wolf raised this issue, and I think that there were some misunderstandings, but on his part. But I'll say this about myself. I didn't understand that the members didn't know about this, and so that was an education for me as well. And so it was a productive thing that he did. And I've written to John Boehner and offered to come to the Republican conference with our IT folks and anybody else he wants to go through this. They may choose a different route. I mean, which is fine. I mean, they set the agenda for their own conference, not me. I've talked to Rahm Emanuel about doing the same thing at the Democratic caucus, although we don't have a date yet. I've talked to the Speaker, and for the CODELs, or the congressional delegations, we're going to put a process in place that the Speaker is going to make sure that every member at least knows some basics before they leave about their vulnerabilities, if they're bringing a laptop, their BlackBerry, their cell phone, and the like. So we'll be ramping up, but it's a process.
Mm-hmm. Well, and can Congress serve, to set a good example here for federal agencies that you've criticized as having?
We do much better than some of the federal. I'll just give you an example, because it was in a public hearing and it's not a secret. We had the Inspector General did a report on U.S. Visit, which is you take visitors, give up their biometrics and an iris scan when they come in. And one of the questions, it wasn't in the report, but one of the questions I asked was, what kind of cybersecurity was in place to protect all this sensitive data? And had there been hacking efforts? The witness said, who would know? They didn't even put intrusion detection software. I was like, you've got to be kidding. So, I mean, if it can be hacked, it probably has been hacked. I mean, my recommendation was it's a lot of data, and there's probably 1 million viruses in it and worms now from the hacking attacks. So it ought to be segregated from other systems. I don't even think they did that. So we have intrusion detection software in the House.
Our guest, you're watching the Communicators. Our guest, Representative Zoe Lofgren of California. Our guest host for this program today, Adrianne Kroepsch of Congressional Quarterly. One of the big issues that you talked about before was that of immigration.
Right.
Specifically, what do you see as the future of the H-1B visa? And it's, for most technology companies, depend on these workers to help them.
Well, you know, what we've done on a bipartisan basis, this Congress, is not just to look at the existing program, but to look at the individuals behind the program. And I know Bill Gates in particular has talked a lot about the H-1B program. There's a role for it, but it does need some reforms. I mean, people are critical of it, and those are valid criticisms in many cases. So we're not this year, but next year, I hope that we can put some reform efforts into place. But a major issue, and we've got a very good bipartisan bill to take a look at high-level STEM graduates, science, technology, engineering, math, people who graduated from an American university with masters or PhDs. You know what we do with those folks now? I mean, you're valedictorian or you get your PhD from MIT in engineering, and then we make you leave, and rather than letting you stay, and hopefully, we'll get the benefit of your knowledge, and you're going to create a lot of jobs at that level as well. So. We really think, a lot of us, on a bipartisan basis, that those individuals, if they want to stay and become Americans, we should grab them and have them stay here and compete on our side instead of going home and competing against us. And it's interesting because the IEEE, which is the largest engineering association in the U.S., I think actually in the world, has always had disagreements on immigration with some of the technology the Semiconductor Industry Association and others. They actually came to an agreement last fall that permanent residence visas for graduates of American universities made sense, and I give them a lot of credit because immigration is a touchy subject, but that makes a lot of sense for America, and I think that will do that.
So when you say reform, is that key amongst what you're trying to get?
Well, yes, that is. I have a bill to do that right now, but I haven't been able to get consensus, although there's a lot of Republicans that are on the bill. The Republican leadership on the Judiciary Committee has not yet come on board on the idea, so we're not going to be able to move that forward in this Congress. But I think next, as Senator Obama has said, we're going to have a comprehensive bill next year, and I think it will include not just this, but other improvements to the system. And right now we have, for example, 140,000 roughly employment-based visas a year. All but 5,000 are people who have very high skill levels. But if if you've got your PhD but you were born in China, you have to wait for 5 years. If you were born in Botswana, you get your visa immediately. Well, that doesn't make sense when the whole thing is based on your skills and your education. So we're going to change that so that it's not discriminatory in that way.
You said that immigration will probably have to wait for next year. Mm-hmm. You were part of the development of the Democrats' innovation agenda.
Yes, I was.
At the very beginning of Congress. How much of that has been accomplished, and how much is left to do? And how much of that remains will probably have to wait until next year? Well,
I'm glad you mentioned the innovation agenda because it was really a lot of fun to work on. A lot of people, they see these documents and they assume, well, some staffer wrote it, and that's not what happened here. It was actually before the Democrats took the majority, and the Speaker was very into this, and she and George Miller and Anna Eshoo and I met, we argued over every word in that agenda because we knew it would be a promise, not just an agenda, but a promise of what we were going to get accomplished. And you're right, we haven't accomplished all of it yet. We've been in charge for 18 months. We did do the Compete Act, which did a lot of it, but it's not yet funded, so that's going to have to get funded next year. We did promise to do improvements in the patent system, and we did a pretty good bill out of the House. The Senate has just, I don't think they're going to get it done. So we're going to have to start that again next year. We did, this is very important, that we need to double our funding for basic research across departments. As you're aware, in December, the president really had us over a barrel. I mean, he wanted to cut funding for science, and he got his way over our vigorous objections. We actually had layoffs in physics labs around the country. It was ridiculous. But we were able to, in this last omnibus, supplemental, to get additional funding for physics and some of the other sciences. But we, over a period of years, we're going to double that funding, and that will make a huge difference for our economy and for the future. We didn't say a lot about immigration in the innovation agenda, but we did say that we would have a special visa for really high-level people, and that's what we've just been talking about. We hope to do that. I mean, this is an agenda that's going to be key for the country, but it's an agenda that will take several years to accomplish. We know that, but we just keep checking in where we are. Energy independence is a major issue, and we took a big step forward, actually, with the energy bill we passed, but that's going to take a while, as we know.
You talk about legislation. One of the things that Representative Berman, one of the delegation, brought up was something called the Pro-IP Act, which dealt with copyright. For those who may not know, what's a quick explanation of it, and where does it stand, and what's your take on it?
I think I was the only person who expressed strong reservations about the bill at the hearing in Markup, although I think Representative Boucher also has some concerns. Obviously, intellectual property deserves defense. I mean, I'm not for piracy, but we also have some competing issues in the United States. We have a First Amendment, and we have the ability to take an original idea and do parodies, there's fair use in the United States. So sometimes in the effort to make sure that IP is protected, the content owners neglect the other part of the scenario, the balance that we have in the United States, and so I had some concerns about that. And I know that the administration has strong objections to the IP czar. I mean, it would be something injustice that is the equivalent of the criminal division. I mean, and they're not going to go for that. And so I think that it's not really going to pass in the Senate. Certainly, we've seen over and over again that anybody in the Senate can stop any action. And at the White House, I know, because they've told me, they're very unhappy about that provision. So that's what I think the outcome will be. I like Howard very much. We work together on many issues. Sometimes he and I don't see eye to eye on the copyright issues.
You just said you've seen a lot of things stop in the Senate this year. You've been a lawmaker for a while now, and
but only in the majority for 18 months.
You were always in the minority.
That's right.
This is the first time you've been in the majority. How has that been over the past 18 months?
Well, it's an interesting new thing for us. I was the freshman Democratic class west of the Rockies in 1994, and I was sworn in for the first time the day that Dick Gephardt handed the gavel to Newt Gingrich. So, and it was all downhill from there. So it was a long time when I was not able to set an agenda. Now, I'm able to do more of that, but the Senate's tied, let's be honest. If it weren't for Joe Lieberman organizing with the Democrats wouldn't be chairing these committees. And so they're finding it very hard to get things accomplished. I expect that well could change in this next election. There may be a greater Democratic majority, and also possibly that could happen in the House, and if we have a Democratic president, we haven't all been pulling in the same direction for a long time. That could make things much different. The power of the majority is not just to pass legislation, but also to have hearings, to develop issues. Sometimes just developing the issue helps change things, and so that's been an interesting experience too.
Speaking of the Senate, what did you make of the Fisa vote?
Well, I voted against Fisa because of the retroactive immunity provisions, but I think the criticism is a little overwrought, really. You know, I don't like to, when somebody's in court, for the Congress to eliminate the cause of action. However, and I can't talk about the documents I saw because they were classified, but the Judiciary Committee has now been read into the whole program, and we reviewed all of these documents, and there is an immunity provision in the existing law. I kept talking about it whenever I talked about Fisa, and I would say, having looked at these documents, that there was at least a 50-50, probably better than 50% chance that these telecoms would have gotten immunity under the old Fisa Act. So, you know, it wasn't crazy to come up with what they did, and there are actually some improvements in civil liberties and privacy in the bill that was passed. Procedurally, I know people don't always look at that, but having the Judiciary Committee as part of the team overlooking this, I think, is significant. I'm not negative on the Intelligence Committee, but we in the Judiciary Committee think every day we wake up thinking about the Constitution, and you know, we're mainly lawyers, and so you know that's going to add an additional depth to the review. We also have a role for the Inspector General that is really much more vigorous. That's important because finding out what's going on is a major barrier. If you don't know what's going on, you can't really go after it, and these intelligence agencies are not the most forthcoming agencies in the federal government, so that's going to be important as well.
When is the next time that Pfizer will be reviewed, and how might a new administration change the law?
Well, I think, you know, we're not constrained to review it. I mean, it's been extended for an extended period of time, but the Congress is free to look at it whenever we want to. Certainly, the retroactive immunity thing cannot be undone because those cases are there. There's going to be a challenge to the constitutionality of our action, which I encourage the litigants to do. They deserve their day in court. But in the end, that'll be decided, I'm sure, before Congress revisits this. I think an intelligent approach would be to see, putting the liability issue to one side, the improvements in the Act, I mean, actually giving additional protection. There was never privacy protection for Americans outside of our borders. Now there is. And that's a huge issue. And one I was surprised that the administration agreed to. So we want to make sure they actually comply with what's in the Act, and then we'll see what additional improvements we should make.
We've got a couple minutes left. I read this morning that now the House and the Senate are going to have YouTube channels. What does that mean for the interaction of technology with the ability of the American public to find out more about what Congress is doing, aside from C-SPAN, of course?
Yeah. Well, there are certainly members who have YouTube presence already, as I'm sure you're aware, and some is organized and some is not. My position is this. I know some people are worried that if there's advertising on spots where members appear, that it will appear as if the Congress is endorsing a commercial venture. I don't agree with that. You know, when you leave the House site, you got a little notice that you're leaving the House site. And, you know, Internet users aren't stupid. I mean, they know that it's not the House of Representatives. It's YouTube. And, you know, people are used to advertising. They can make their own judgments. I think it's cool.
There was something in the House last week concerning the use of Twitter or like social networking sites. Culbertson, and I mean, he Twitters, and that's fine. I don't have time to Twitter, honestly, but what was the big problem? Well, there was no problem. He was manufacturing a problem. And
explain to people who don't know what Twitter is what Twitter is.
Twitter is very small messages that you can send out to a cell phone network, and it's like, you know, I don't blog either because I don't have time, and I'm not going to have my staff do my blogs. I mean, I'm not going to be deceptive about it. I mean, one of the things about being in the majority is you get up early and you go like crazy till late at night just trying to get your stuff done, and that's the situation I find myself in.
Adrianne Kroepsch, you get the last question.
the last question. Well, I was looking at the different bills you've introduced this Congress. There were two on wireless issues. We haven't talked much about wireless yet. One would prevent cell phone taxes, taxes on bills from going
new taxes,
prevent new taxes. Another would help servicemen and women get out of telecommunications contracts that they're locked into if they're going overseas. One might read that maybe you don't think the wireless industry is being particularly consumer friendly right now. Is that the case, or what are your views on some of the wireless issues?
The wireless providers were very helpful in refining the bill for the soldiers, and a lot of companies do this. Sometimes it's overlooked. They agree, and they're not fighting or disagreeing with the bill. I mean, you're deployed to Iraq, you don't need your contract back in San Jose, and you ought to be able to cancel it like other things that soldiers are protected from. And so we've not had any kind of fight with them on that. On the telephone tax, the bill, and we're growing sponsors. I think we're up to almost 80 sponsors today. We've had a tremendous growth in state local taxes on wireless, and it's the fastest growth of taxes of practically any entity, and because it's easy to do. And the reason why I introduced the bill is that, especially as we get to the next sale of auction, this is going to be the platform for internet access, especially for people who are least affluent in American society. And we've all agreed that we don't want a discriminatory burden on internet access. Well, that's what this is about for people who don't have the money to go buy a laptop or a desktop. And this is going to be their internet access. And we shouldn't be loading up to make it even harder for people to have that access. We know that access to the internet is an enabler for many, many other things, and we ought to do everything we can to support people and their access to the internet.
Our guest on the Communicators has been Representative Zoe Lofgren of California. Our guest host, Adrianne Kroepsch of Congressional Quarterly. To both of you, thanks for being on the program.
Thanks.
Thank you.